Hello and welcome everyone to the Community for Rigor's first event, Rigorous and Glamorous, our abstract workshop. Today we'll be workshopping abstracts submitted by our community. Konrad, our PI, will introduce the Community for Rigor as our PI. We'll discuss psychological safety as we're workshopping people's work and trying to be very, very respectful of those who have been so generous with their intellectual products. And then we'll begin working on some abstracts. We received lots of great abstracts. If we don't get through all of them, we do want to thank everyone who shared their work. Also, if you submitted an abstract, we will be inviting you to speak on the stage during this presentation, if you're comfortable doing that. We would like to have you up on the stage the whole time. You don't have to be on camera or on mic the whole time, but it would be really nice to have a sort of a small quorum of people here to discuss with Konrad as he's going through the abstracts. So with that, I will kick it over to Konrad and I'll start inviting some people up.
Wonderful. Let me start with my own history here. So I started out as a very, very, very bad writer. So my first paper went through 120 or so iteration. How do I know? On my computer, there's still kind of like my first paper version 120 as file name on my hard disk. How did that come about? Well, I would write a paper and write an abstract and I'd send it to my supervisor and I get it like redlined. And he'd send it back to me and I didn't quite understand how to make it better. And I'd rewrite it, all of it, send it back, get it back just as redlined. And I went back and forth and kind of like I wasn't getting anywhere. I mean, like I ended up publishing a few papers during my PhD, but the important thing is it was like super painful every single time. And then I went to postdoc with Daniel Walpert in London, and everything completely changed. My whole process of writing completely changed. What was the difference? When I was in London, Daniel Walpert got the same like bad abstracts as I was writing it back at that point of time. But Daniel wouldn't be like, okay, here's like some red lines, like do it better. But he'd be like, Konrad, you sit next to me. And he'd be like, okay, we're going to fix this abstract right now. And he'd go through that abstract. And I could see kind of that there was a system to it. And he'd go through the paper. And I could see that there was a system to it. And through that kind of like it all got to be really painless. It was like a logical process. I understood what I was doing. And everything I do in writing these days is kind of just trying to start with how Daniel Walpert was doing it and doing it better. And because that experience with Daniel was so transformative for me, I'm trying to kind of like do a little bit of abstract writing with as many people as I can. And like here we're trying to like get a group together so you all see that because I think it's useful. The third person that's like was super important for my growth as a writer was Brad Mensch. Now, Brad Mensch is kind of a grant writing consultant. He's like arguably the best in the neurospace. And he also thinks an awful lot about papers. And what he always, up to this day, when I write a new paper, I'm like, okay, Brad, let's go through my abstract together. And it takes Brad like 20 minutes like to help me understand how the abstract arrives at his site. And that makes a huge difference for me. I should also say, like, Brett and me wrote a paper, Tensible was for structuring papers, that has been downloaded almost, I mean, like, in the current version, almost 1 million times. One of the most tweeted about papers, where we try and write what we understand about writing. So that is the first piece. That's kind of why I'm doing this. That's why I hope it will be useful for all of us to do some writing work together today. So that's why I'm doing that. That's why hopefully you're here. The next thing that I needed to say is about psychological safety. You know, like having someone like go through your own abstract feels like really weird. And I still have that when I write with Brad. You know, like he goes to my abstract and he's like, okay, I don't know, like, what's your question here? That's not clear what your question is. And he kind of like he shares kind of how a naive reader kind of understands things. And it's a little painful when that happens, no? Like, because it's like, oh, I thought that was clear, but it's clearly not clear. Like, and it has all those aspects. So it's a weird process. And it's also weird for me, you know, like as I go through these abstracts, you need to know that on every single abstract, I will with near certainty be almost incompetent. But at the same time, by giving you like how like a naive but informed reader would read through your abstract, I'm kind of giving you an idea on like what works and what doesn't work. So it's also for me like a deeply personal process. And so with that, like if I say that something could be better, I don't mean that it's bad. No, like we all our abstracts like feel like that in the beginning. Like the way how abstracts get to be good is by kind of being iterated over and over and over again. So if I say something like, oh yeah, look here, we should be doing more like this, like that doesn't mean like, oh yeah, it's not good. It just means I see that this could like shine better, that this could be like a more useful product. So therefore, like it's important to like take that from that perspective. We're doing that to learn from one another. No abstract is ever perfect. And kudos to the people kind of willing to like go through their abstract here together. In that sense, I want to say two things. The first thing is I want everyone to pitch in. Or like I do something, I change something, I edit some text. You don't understand why I do that edit, please speak up. Do it on chat, do it in the Q&A where Zach will be able to kind of relay your messages. Or just speak up and let's talk about it. Let's kind of learn from one another how we can write as well as possible. The last thing I wanted to say is the author of each abstract. I need you here with me as we go through that abstract because I'm incompetent in your field. The only way how I can like improve the abstract and help you see kind of how it could be stronger is if I can ask you questions and you can ask me questions. So that's the important piece. Does anyone have questions who has questions about the format, how we'll be doing that? Well, if there's no question, why don't we dig right in? I'm gonna now share my screen here. And what you should all be seeing is, hold on, that is not working the way I was hoping it would. Okay, you should now be able to see my screen. Can you see my screen? Can I see like a thumbs up if you see my screen? Awesome.
At this time, we're going to begin inviting those who submitted their abstracts up. I've also shared in the chat the document Konrad's working from. It looks like lots of people have jumped in already. So you'll receive invitations now. Please stay on mute if you don't have anything that you're actively contributing at this time.
Wonderful. I just copied the abstract we got like in a pretty random order into this document. I don't know the names of people associated with it. Who wrote the Exploring Face Pareidolia abstract?
Hi, that was me. Can you guys hear me?
Oh, wonderful. Yes, very well. Nice to meet you, Pranjul, and thanks so much for sharing your abstract for this this exercise. What I will do now is I will try and get I will project being a completely naive reader. In this area, I like know at least a little bit, but I will project being a complete naive reader. I will share how like what I think at that point of time as a projected naive reader. And while we do that, we'll go a little bit about like what the structures are that we're looking for in abstract. But like we'll do that with the example of the specific abstract. So I'm gonna read it. Maybe I'll new line some lines. I'll talk about the structure as there's like a standard structure of abstracts that people generally use. I'll try and like together we'll try and like refine the pieces of it and then we'll put it back together. And the idea is like this should feel like a real writing session with someone that you're writing together. and that hopefully will be useful. So let's jump right in. Pareidolia, the human propensity to perceive familiar pattern, particular faces in random stimuli. Okay, I get it. Like I look at like a gray screen, like a screen that just sees static, and sometimes you like it feels like you see things, or you look at a cloud and the cloud like has the shape of what do you know, a top hat, and it's like, yeah, that's the top hat. So I think that that's what pareidolia is. I have never heard the word before, but like it kind of makes sense. And so far, this text does a really good job at like explaining to me what pareidolia is. And now remains a captivating aspect of visual perception. Now it just means like pareidolia is an enigma. Like, yeah, I'm like after the sentence, I'm like, yeah, I want to know like how pareidolia like works. And now we have this study demonstrates that diverse gaze training enhances face pareidolia detection. However, it introduces challenges in explainable information due to scan path prediction complexity. Okay, now I'm like a little bit lost. So, and I'm lost for two reasons. So the first thing is like in the general anatomy. Now, like for everyone who's writing abstracts, like abstracts have a standard format, like by default. In fact, nature forces you to that to use that format. It has a first piece that you could call gap statement. In that gap piece, you're like, there's science, they're doing these things. There's this thing that is unknown. Someone needs to like make this unknown thing be a known thing. So that is like a first piece of how abstracts are generally structured. And then that comes like, it comes usually with like a here we component, here we, and then it describes what the methods are that we use. And then it almost always comes the results like we find, and then it almost always ends with like something that you could call meaning. There's another way of saying this, not like this sets the context, and this sets the contents, and this last meaning piece sets the conclusion. And so this is kind of the standard format that I'll usually be looking for. But at some level here, like this first sentence is like, wow, pareidolia is like, it's a thing. I kind of knew that my kids at least see things in like random stimuli. But then it says what this study does. So like this like jumps like right kind of like into the results section. For abstract writing, at some level, I'd like to get a clearer sense of what that thing is that is missing. And maybe let's see if we find that in here. Now, like here, look, we leverage, this is clearly like methods. Deep gaze is a method and so forth. Yeah, Pranjul, let's see if we can fine tune it better. Like, what is the question that you want to ask about this?
So the question here is basically we are trying to understand the visual saliency of different kinds of object categories, object or like visual categories. So the broadest categories are like faces and objects. And given that humans are extremely like salient for faces, we wanted to see like how far does this extend into the object domain. So objects are not that important to us. So pareidolia kind of fits in that middle region, and we're trying to quantify that. So that
So
is
you
kind of
kind of want to know like people like see a face even if there's like no face, and
yeah.
to which level they also see if there's an object, if there's no object.
I mean, generally the inverse doesn't happen. Like people seeing objects is kind of, I would say, rare. Generally, like if you take the average person, then it would be like a face that is much more dominant stimuli as compared to like any other object.
Okay, so what that means is if I look at an image of like white noise or something, you expect my eyes to go towards regions that just randomly look like faces a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually a study already, but where we automatically project faces.
Okay, so but like your question here is if it also goes towards objects.
It's more about the extent to which it generalizes. So it's like how far, like we already know that faces are salient.
Yeah.
So we want to know, like, are pareidolia in a similar category? Like how salient are they in context to faces? So if faces are here,
Oh, I see.
then how
So
like salient?
so you'll then produce stimuli that that where like actually like it's there is like really a bit of an object there. It's just like very subliminal
Exactly.
or something. Okay,
Exactly.
cool. Subliminal. And you just want to know, do they only do faces or do they also do object? Is that the big question?
Exactly, exactly. So we have three
Okay.
categories. We have three categories. So we have faces, we have objects, and we have pareidolia. So then we quantify each of them separately and we try to see like which ones is good, which one's not good. So that's like the
Okay,
whole
that's
idea.
great. So the question is like now, like if there's only faces or if we can ultimately see objects.
Mhm.
And now what we want to do is like work this out as like a set of as like a set of questions that kind of convince people that this is like a great question. Now, like, so let's see here. So I love how this first piece brings across what pareidolia is. I think I'm less excited about the second part. Now, like, it's captivating. Like, yeah, I was captivated before you said it's captivating. No, like it's kind of like, hey, everyone, not like everyone has that experience. You look at a cloud and it's like, wow, look at that. That's the old man swearing in the clouds, swearing at the clouds. So I don't think you'll need, like in abstracts, the other problem that we always have, and this is great, like because we get by talking through this abstract, we get to talk about like all the pieces here. Like for abstracts, we almost always are like very limited in space. So that means like we kind of want to get at the question as quickly as possible. So let's see if we can like this aspect. So I think we can take this out. So now the question is now like you're like now embedding them and you're seeing to which level people get them. So the question, now, like there's multiple ways of doing this here, as always when abstract writing. Now we could like start with the existing literature where you can say, no, like it could be something like this. It is often studied by embedding very weak images in noise. And then something like, however, we currently do not know if to which level it applies to no, to which level it applies to objects, or if it is really primarily there for faces. There's something like that. Like we want to get from like, here's the phenomenon. Here's kind of what's happening in that space. Here's the question. And then like, if you want, like, if this is kind of the sentence that like sets up what the real gap is that you have in the sentence, in the paper, this is kind of what you'll be judged against. Like if you say, however, so-and-so, I'll be like, oh, is Pranjul convincing me of that? Yes, he is. Okay, great. Great paper. Like kind of like, so this kind of like this gap statement here, like sets not just what the gap is, but also what the paper claims to be contributing. So, but I think we haven't yet quite set it up because like you will be talking about gaze, like, and if you talk about gaze, it kind of like, you probably mean that if there's something that's like remotely like a face, people are like, look there, I see it. No, you probably look at something like eye movement. Is that right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, cool. So In that case, I think we will need to set that up. It is often starting very weak images and noise and checking if human subjects then look at these stimuli. And that's, I think, the logic. And now everyone see why do I need to do that with Pranjul? I don't understand that field. So I need to ask. But at the same time, kind of like it's good to kind of go back and forth like this. Would you say this correctly now like sets up what the question is that you want to answer?
Yeah, I would say that I guess like this would be more like an introduction part. Like I think I probably jumped too much into the results and like I kind of mixed all that up. I think this is probably like a better introduction as compared to the earlier one. Like the earlier one was just like one statement on what I'm going to do and then directly jumping to results. So
Yeah,
I
so
didn't think about that.
and this is something that I see with almost all writers when you do these things for the first time. Like, look, we work on our research for a long time. So of course, when we first communicate our research, we are starting with the things that we do because that were the big things for us. But like, of course, for our audience, in this case, Konrad, kind of we want to give them, okay, like this is what you're going to take away from that. And so like this process that it starts with like saying more what you do and like ends up with more like of what you find is really important. Like brief notice here about like scientific rigor. Now, like we want to be a little bit careful that the result wasn't known when we started. Like if we would start with like, okay, here's like human eye movements, and does it look at like kind of like we want to set up the question kind of before doing research. So here's something I do with my lab, and I think it's super useful. Before they do any research, I tell them, don't do research before you wrote your abstract. Before they do any research, I ask them to write an abstract. Just imagine it all comes out the way you want. And by going through this exercise of writing down, this is the question that I'm asking. And this is not like, you can know like, well, would I like this paper? Would I want to read it if like that was the paper? Like kind of, it's a good way of like planning research. And also once you write the abstract, it's often like rather clear, like, oh, I need this control to be convincing on it and so forth. So wonderful. Okay, now we have a gap statement. Now, after the gap statement comes like we will now transition from here's the question and to here's how we're going to answer that question. It always starts with the magical here we with an implied and as this is now the question, therefore we will be doing the following set of things. So the statement that comes after this needs to kind of be a convincing, this is kind of what we do to answer the question piece. So let's do that. Here we quantify the importance of objects in pareidolia by embedding faces by subliminally or something. Embedding faces, you said there's 3 groups. Faces, objects, and what's the third one?
The pareidolia group. So it's like 3 different distinct categories. So in the objects one, it's just like plain objects and nothing going on, just like take a picture of an object. In the pareidolia one, there is like a pareidolia image. That's like what humans would say that, okay, there is a face pareidolia there. It's like a pareidolia image.
So it's not that you embed it into that. It's like rather that you like ask lots of people, do you see a face? And you like take random noise that people say is a face.
Yeah, I mean, we are not really using noise here. So, I mean, the noise one was probably like, I don't know, like maybe we can use it as an example or maybe we cannot, but like we are not using noise, but there is research on that. Like people have done research doing what you exactly mentioned right now, like embedding faces and noise.
Okay,
And
but what are the 3 groups of stimuli? So you just show faces. So they're like just photographs of faces.
RGB images, exactly. Simple photographs.
Okay. And so they're not weak. They're just like full on like photographs of people.
Yeah, I mean, you can say them weak in the sense of like weak face or something like, or weak object or something. So
Okay.
that in that sense, subliminal could be used. Like, I mean, that could be. Okay.
Okay, and now like those pareidolia images, tell me how they look like. I'm just I'm just trying to get like a notion
Sure.
of what they are.
So, I mean, like, think about, for example, like a face in a coffee cup or something like that. So if you draw like a smiley or something in a coffee cup and you take an image of that,
Oh,
that would be.
studied by looking at photographs where human observers see something that is not real, something like that.
No,
Is that fair, like the sentence here?
I would say that, like, I mean, it's although debatable, like some people are like in the camp of like the real, not real thing. Like when I presented it here, it's like some people like seeing faces and things, and they say that it's not a mistake. So it's just,
Um, okay, one could chop the that is real a little bit and kind of say that don't correspond to like actual faces or
yeah,
something.
exactly. So our
Um,
so it's like more contextual in that sense, like it's like
that
corresponding to just these two categories and not something else. Yeah.
um scientists then use eye movements to understand how human subjects perceive such stimuli. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say that. That looks good.
Cool. However, we currently do not know to which level. No, something like this. Good. Now, here we quantify the objects, the importance of objects in pareidolia okay, now I understand better what you're doing by comparing eye movements of human subjects for 3 classes of images, faces, objects, and pareidolia images. And you see what I did here? Like pareidolia images, I introduced it in sentence 2, and now I reuse it. So key thing when abstract writing, like you want to like use one term and then use it throughout. It might be that you'll find out that like you want to use slightly different wording, but then you want to like carry it through. You know? Like the key pieces of like the logic, kind of like they're usually part of the question and they're usually part of the methods, and they're typically also part of the results. Great. Good. Now that we have that, let's look at the methods piece here. A sophisticated set of computer models called deep gaze. Okay, so deep gaze is a model that predicts eye movements, predicts how a human would do eye movements. What is the scientific logic of what you're using that model for? Like why do we need that model to bring home the argument about pareidolia?
Because it was trained on non-pareidolia stimuli. So it was never trained on any kind of like, so it is like normal seen gaze behavior. And we're just trying to see whether that seen gaze behavior generalizes to something as abstract as pareidolia.
I see. So you want to like, but like I kind of like weakly see a second question in here. And this is also something that always appears as part of abstract writing, that like we start with multiple questions. And like there is the question, does deep gaze do things like humans?
Mhm.
And then there is like can we use deep gaze as a tool where you could say kind of like on pareidolia images, does deep gaze somehow does deep gaze as a tool reveal that people see the object?
Yeah, I mean, it's more like so I think another context that might be helpful here is that uh, we like try to do the same on like face detection models. So we use like face detection models and we try to see whether like those face detection models are able to generalize to pareidolia stimuli, and they don't at all.
Oh, they don't. Oh, that's so
Exactly.
interesting.
They are like completely, so it's completely 0% accuracy. So that
Okay.
is where deep gaze comes in, because it's much more human in that sense that it's trained
Oh,
on human eye gaze movement.
oh, you mean deep gaze shows it, but past saliency models don't?
It's, I mean, it's not about like all past saliency models. It's more about face detection models. Face
Right,
detection,
right,
if
right.
you like take like a
Yeah.
face
Okay, cool. Get it.
cropping of
Yes.
some face, like
Yeah.
bounding box or something like that. So
You can say deep gaze looks at things, even though it might not like, though a machine learning algorithm might not label it as that. But what I don't yet understand is like, how does deep gaze answer the question? Now, like we want to answer to which level does pareidolia apply to objects? That's our question here.
mhm.
How does, what does the deep gaze model do for us here?
So now what we do is that we have like we run experiments on these three categories, and we collect the eye gaze movements and we make saliency maps out of them. And then we compare these saliency maps of these eye gaze movements, human eye gaze movements, with the deep gaze eye gaze movements. And
Okay.
we see the correlations for these three categories. So
Okay.
we see that like here, like the correlations are pretty much uh, almost like at par with like human gaze level, even for deep gaze. So it's like there is very slight difference. So it's like almost around as good as the model itself is on any other stimuli, even though deep gaze has not been trained on face pareidolia. So
Yeah, so deep gaze is a great model for human for eye movements for the three classes of images.
exactly, exactly.
But how does deep gaze help us answer the question?
I mean, you mean like
No,
how?
so maybe the question is deep gaze a good model for eye movements for pareidolia images? Now I'm trying to get to the place where like the methods that you use
Mhm,
fit exactly like the question that's asked for. And like that's like it's standard for everyone here. Like in abstract writing, you will almost always find that you need to like edit both of them. Like you added the methods to better answer the question, but you also added the question to be more answerable with the tools that you have at your disposal.
mhm. Yeah, so I would say that here maybe we can edit the question a little bit to say that pareidolia, like you're just trying to see like how good pareidolia is not just for objects but to faces too. So it's like a comparison to both as compared to just objects.
So, but to make deep gaze be important for that, maybe we need to set up. It's like almost like you want to learn something about deep gaze, like to which level does deep gaze have the same pareidolia properties as humans, or is your question exclusively about humans?
Yeah, I would say that like I would say the first statement, it's more about like I would want to learn like because like since human gaze is the golden standard, I would like to say that I would go from the deep gaze direction and probe the human gaze with different computational models in order to understand like how good each model is.
I
So
see. So then the real question isn't like to which level pareidolia applies to objects, but to which level we can have eye movement. models that apply to, that predict gaze for pareidolia and other stimuli or something. That seems like that's then the question that you want to ask with what happens afterwards.
Yeah, I guess so. Now it's more in line with the title too. So I would say that it's probably a better
Yes. Okay,
match.
great. Cool. Yes. Okay, cool. Here we quantify. Okay, here we quantify how well gaze models predict eye movements predict human eye movements. Like, let's say here, human. Oh, I'm not good at typing today. Eye movements. For 3 classes of images, faces. Okay, great. Hold on, and now like there's a problem with the question still, which is kind of like models haven't been set up yet. At some level, if I'd be a naive reader here, I don't know like models, like I have never heard about it, like kind of like that's the new land. So like let's say here recent models based on deep learning have shown impressive progress at predicting eye movements. No, so now like the model drops in here. We said that we say that we want to ask a question about it, and then like basically now I'm set up to like understand what happens afterwards. No? Like you want to know, can we have a good model for that? You have 3 classes of stimuli. You will now see how good the model is at each of them, and now I know what will happen with the here we quantify how well gaze models predict. We use deep gaze. We use the state of the art. I hope it's still state of the art. Machine learning always changes. Deep gaze model. We to make eye movement predictions, focusing specifically on pareidolia. Okay, now we said the same thing as this model here, as this thing here. Actually, this sentence is good. I'm sorry. There's no reason to mess with your sentence here. But like, let's say we use. Okay, although not explicit, deep gaze models exist. Here, that's okay. Here, like, so now this thing feels like you're setting up background knowledge. So it feels like this shouldn't live here. Like this is the result section. So it feels like this thing, if anything, wants to live there. Models specifically deep gaze. No, now we have it like set up like this. So like at some level, like the problem with the question is always like all the things that I need to like understand the question kind of need to happen on the run up to the question, and then comes like what specific here we do here. no, then we don't need to introduce a deep gaze anymore because that happened up there. We also don't need to necessarily say this thing. No, like this thing either will be a result, in which case it like shows up as a result. But here,
Yeah, so the thing with deep gaze is that it's like there are 3 models in it. So it's like one of them is about like aggregate vision. And so the third one, deep gaze 3, is more about individual differences. So there are like a bunch of these models, deep gaze models.
models predict human eye movements for the 3 classes. Okay, here, like now we introduce the 3 of them. And now, like this is like the method. So like we run them and see how good they fit. Zach.
No, I
I
mean,
have
like,
a question in the chat that I'll go and read out now that will be helpful for both our presenters. It seems like there's a hidden assumption that eye movement models are an explanation or possible explanation or one of potentially multiple mechanisms for pareidolia. Is this true? Is this connection part of what is being tested in this paper via deep gaze? So do eye movement models explain pareidolia?
yeah, I would say that that's what we are finding. I mean, like, it's perfectly plausible just to go from a raw, uh, like open scenes dataset trained eye gaze model to for that model, and that has not been like explicitly like fine-tuned or uh, narrowly trained on face pareidolia to get face pareidolia out of it, and it works really well. It's
Yeah.
like it's state of the art. It's as good as all the rest of them. So it's kind of like an emergent behavior, and
Yeah, and I
that's
just
exactly.
added like a sentence setting that up like that. It's
Mhm.
true that it's a central modeling assumption that's necessary for the approach to make much sense. So in
Yeah.
any case, like not like here, like I'm just so the gap is becoming slightly long now. That's sometimes okay, no? Like it's a really complicated logic that you're using.
Mhm.
And now let's jump to the results. Not like no magic here. We find that deep gaze 2E, a model variant. Well, we already said there's 3 of them. Demonstrates a high correlation with aggregated human trials. This feels like a little bit overly detailed. No, with aggregated human trials, like it just means it's good at predicting it, like at some level. So I think no.
Yeah, the thing is here that like the reason why this has been mentioned, because if you look at the individual differences, then it's like bad. It's like really, really bad. So it at like aggregated correlation, it's like at 80% like that's the state of the art, 80% accuracy. And for individual differences, it's like at 30% maximum.
Yeah.
So it's like a huge difference.
Not like I know say is good at predicting average eye movement behavior. It's also like when editing abstracts, I always try to kind of make the language more like simple, because
Okay.
in reality, this is something that we all need to be aware when writing abstracts or anything for that matter. Now, there's a human being on the other side. So I always tell my students, like, if you wouldn't use that language talking with your friends, you probably don't want to write it in your paper. So no, because like on the other side is a PhD student, just like you, who's like a student who's just tired and like who has like all the human properties. So it's good to kind of make things easy for them. No, like this thing just says again that it's good capturing collective gaze pattern. Okay, it's good at predicting things. I think that's good. Deep gaze 3. Okay. Exhibits a lower correlation, is worse. Is worse at predicting individual human trials. Well, here, provides valuable insights, but allows us to visualize individual differences. Now, this thereby contributing to a nuanced understanding. That's kind of like, it feels like if you tell me you can use it to visualize individual differences, it's kind of clear that that's what it then functionally does. So I think I'd be inclined to keep that shot here. Furthermore, we investigate the impact of data set. Okay, so here now we have 2 out of the 3 models that you mentioned. What happened to the third?
So that's what I was trying to say. I mean, it's not exactly 1, 2, 3. It's more the 1 is the aggregated one, the 2 is the aggregated one, and that was it was so good that they stopped after that. So for the third one, they went on to individual differences. So that was what I was trying to say. I have done the correlations with 1, 2, but it's it's not. I mean, it's a little bit worse than the second one. So it's not that. I mean, it's around 75% if the second one is at 80%. So it's not that different. So that's why we didn't mention it. So
okay, cool.
Left it on.
Good. I hope that that's good now. I added some explanation what these 2 models mean. I think the reader will help the reader a lot. Furthermore, we investigate the impact of data set characteristics on the correlation. Our findings reveal that correlations are lower when the data set is class-centric. Now, this here in the inverted things, these are all incidental findings. They don't relate to the question that you set up there. Tell me why you think it should be here.
So I mean, we are just trying to see how well does the model, now that we know that it has potential to be salient to pareidolia, we want to see how far does that go. So we try to do it with again, first of all, with correlating with faces versus objects, then second of all with varying the data set, then third of all by changing its orientation, whether we do the same experiments upside down, how well does the top down versus bottom up explanation arrive from that. So those are 2, 3 methods that we came up with to kind of stress test the model more as compared to just saying that, okay, we found face pareidolia, that's it, done.
Great, cool. So what does it mean for a data set to be class-centric?
So in this case, it's a closed, cropped up, centrally focused image of the stimuli.
Okay,
Whereas in the other one, it's a scene. Basically, it can be in the top right corner, or it's you do it from far away distance. So then it's not right in your face. So we wanted to see what's the difference between these two, how well do they differentiate.
Great, cool. Now let's add a conclusion sentence. Now all I did in the edit here is kind of make it a little just a little bit shorter. We found that deep gaze popular eye movement model is strong at predicting pareidolia as strong at and now understand how it does so, or something like that. Now going back, you've focused early on in telling me that objects are important, but objects are missing now. So it's either you want to make objects be salient, the comparison faces versus objects salient in the results, or you want to kill it in the questions. So like there's always like all the things that you kind of mention in the setup, you want to kind of like answer it.
Yeah, I mean, again, like my context for like a pareidolia for objects was always in the context of pareidolia. So, I mean, I would say that I won't just focus on objects. I would focus both on faces and objects at the same time. So, I mean, like we are like being symmetric here. We are like not being partial here. Like it's just that when you do it with humans, humans are like extremely good with faces and really bad with objects. So the difference like kind of emerges there.
Okay, cool. Actually, like now I just that I just reread it, we over time like mostly edited it out. At some point of time, the faces versus objects was the main question, but it no longer is. So this is good. Now we have like, I think this is a rather nice abstract. It sets up a question, basically, how good's deep gaze at explaining things? It concludes with saying that deep gaze is really good at explaining it.
Okay.
It's much clearer to me like what the question is and so forth, and you see like what this abstract work is about. And that's like let's maybe zoom out a little bit for why I think this process is so important. Like if we're not careful with this abstract writing process, we have like methods that don't answer our questions, and it's very difficult. Then it's difficult for us because we don't know if we're ever there. Like what does it mean for the paper to be finished if there's like a clear question? How good are models at predicting eye movements? Boom, like 80% are squared, or like something like that. It kind of like is clear what it means for us to be finished, or like is pareidolia a thing for objects or only for faces? Boom, like answer is yes. And kind of like so you want to kind of be in a situation where it's like very clear in the abstract what the logic is, or like what's the question, how do we answer that question? Because once that logic is clear, it's clear for us what we need to do as scientists, and it's clear for our readers kind of what they take away from that. So I'm much happier with the abstract now. And I hope for everyone that like by going through this in great detail, this one abstract, you kind of saw the process. Like we're looking for like the gap and the methods so that the two of them really match one another, and then a conclusion that kind of derives from that. So why don't we move on to the next abstract? Here we have the Golgi. And I should say one more thing. Now, like the abstracts that we edit here, the way I edit them isn't going to be like the final form. It's not. There's going to be a lot of things that could be much better. The goal of this is more for you to see why kind of like it makes sense to rewrite the abstracts to bring it into standard form. Cool. Who wrote Golgi tendon organ abstracts? It would be great to bring them on stage. Hey, Cristian.
How's it going?
I hear you, or I see that you're a fellow movement scientist. I'm very excited about that.
There we go.
Wonderful. So we'll need to go through this paper a little faster. Now, like the first paper was like a backbone for me to talk about all the pieces. So let's dive right in. I'm gonna read it again, projecting naive reader, and then see how we get there. And I see there's like 2 chat comments here. Okay, cool. No, this is great. Thank you, Zach, for like providing meta commentary on that. Let's start reading this. Heteronymous inhibition between lower limb muscles is attributed primarily to recurrent inhibitory circuits in humans, but could also arise from Golgi tendon organs. I like love it because you set up 2 theories. I'm not quite yet on board because like for a naive reader like me, that question is like a little inscrutable yet. So let me see if I get that right. We are talking about like 2 leg muscles, heteronymous inhibition means that like one of them makes the other not do something. But tell me like just like give me like 1 or 2 sentences so that I understand what that thing is.
Yes, very in a nutshell. When you stimulate the muscle with a nerve that innervate that muscle, you can analyze the response, which is called homonymous. And heteronymous means that you stimulate a nerve that doesn't innervate that muscle, but you see the response in that muscle.
I see. So when you stimulate the nerve innervating a muscle, it influences activity at that muscle. Homonymous, I presume.
Yep.
But also other muscles.
Exactly.
But it also inhibits, maybe. Is it always inhibition, or sometimes it excites, sometimes it
Could be
inhibition?
both. Could be
Okay,
both.
but also other muscles. Okay,
But
cool.
this study we're focusing on inhibition.
That's fine for the second sentence. So like a little bit like the idea of an abstract is often you start with something big, like influences between muscles, then you narrow it down a little bit, like kind of inhibition, and then you narrow it down, and then you have your gap, and then like you kind of answer the gap. So heteronymous inhibition between lower limb muscles is attributed primarily to recurrent inhibitory circuits in humans. Now, recurrent inhibitory circuits, you're talking about like cells in spinal cord talking with one another or something. Let's like spell that out a little bit, because like I think like, and like, why am I doing this? And like in reality, when you write abstracts like this, you might be thinking primarily about people in your own field, because those are the ones that you like meet really many times. But most papers are like relevant really like for like a slightly bigger group of people. No? Like I'm like a general purpose movement scientist. I might be interested in that because I study like what happens if like a robot hits my arm or something. So like at some levels, always good to be inviting to people that are like slightly outside of your area. So so let's spell that out. Recurrent inhibitory circuits in, I don't think we need to say humans here. No? Like kind of it's probably like for a lot of like, we could say inhibitory circuits in the spinal cord. But so tell me about like, how is that Golgi tendon organ thing an alternative?
Okay. Most of this has been done in cats, first of all. That's how we know this.
Great.
That's why we put human. And everything has been attributed to inhibitory. There's a whole European view that everything comes from recurrent inhibition.
Yeah.
Then in the last 40 years, other groups has explored other sources of this, which can come from Golgi tendon organs. And that has not been acknowledged at all.
So would that be a fair description of how I just rewrote it?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So like you see what I'm doing here a little bit, like it's a very different edit than what I did on the last abstract. Like it's always like I'm always asking myself, who's the target audience? In fact, I should have asked you, but like at some level for this paper, like and correct me, Cristian, if you see that differently, but like my rough hunch would be the target audience is just movement scientists. But if your target audience is people who record from the spinal cord, then you would maybe have needed to say a little less. But in the spirit of like showing love for the broader field, I think it's good to like spell out these things a little bit. Okay, cool. Distinguishing between recurrent activity and mechanical activation of the GTOs is challenging because the heteronymous effects are both elicited by stimulation on nerve belly above motor threshold. Now, this thing kind of almost is already said in the previous sentence. No, it could be this or it could be this. Oh, but hold on. And then what if we should say? And here we could say, however, both possible mechanisms would have similar effects at the muscle level. Is that right?
It is right. The only thing is that the method that elicit once also elicit the other.
Yes. Okay, cool. Good. Because there because nerve stimulation or a muscle belly above a motor threshold will produce the same effects. Is that good?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, look, I already like how you like followed the standard format here. Now, like here, like look, it's interesting. No? Like your question is like wholly implicit, and it's like super clear to me what the question is. Like we want to know: is it either the Golgi tendon organ, or is it that recurrent inhibitory circuit, or probably it's both, or like it's one or the other. Like, and I kind of know that you will now do so that's like the implicit gap statement. Like, and that's like an important thing when working with gaps. Many times it's not like night and day where it's like, okay, that's the gap. It's more like, yeah, that's like but so yeah, here's a clear implicit question. Now here you do a device that a lot of people do, which is like you use passive tense. Here the influence was examined. Passive tense is like, it's like you're like, yeah, that's kind of not me. Like I'm kind of like at some distance to that. Like it usually makes it harder to read. So modern writing theory like suggests that in those cases you usually want to be active tense.
Here we examine, right?
That's right. We examined. No, let's actually we compared the magnitude of inhibition from quadriceps muscle belly stimulation at 5 Q stimulation intensities before and after the acute bout of. Okay, at this point of time, tell me how that distinguishes them. No, like here we distinguish these two mechanisms by comparing the magnitude of heteronomous inhibition. But why does that reveal which of how strong the two ideas are?
Yeah, so okay, so what we did here is we fatigue the muscle. As soon as
I see.
As soon as you
okay,
fatigue,
cool. Let's say that first. By using fatigue as a mechanism. Okay, fatigue was used to decrease fatigue, decreases Q stimulation evoked force while using the same pre-fatigue stimulation currents. Okay, cool. I get it. Nice logic. I get it. That's a decrease after Q and a linear relationship, both before would support mechanical activation. After fatigue, evoked knee torque heteronomous were significantly decreased. Here, this is still like just checking the basics of the logic that you have. And now, oh, but like, what's the result? Here, that's the result here. Okay, so it feels a little bit like you're giving me more details than you necessarily need. You know, like it feels like it's a nice question. I love the question now. And basically, you're using the trick that fatigue affects one of the mechanisms and not the other. And here you're giving me a lot of like data for it. And at some level, most readers don't need that. You know, like readers want to like go like, okay, what's your approach? And once I understood that you use fatigue as a trick because it should affect one, but it shouldn't affect the other one, I'm like super happy with the abstract. And then it's kind of like you keep giving me like this data and that data and mechanical activation and so forth. A lot of it isn't necessary to like give you your answer. So for further work on that, I would like try to reduce the length of that by like maybe 30, 40, 50%. Just because like your logic is just beautiful. Like let it stand on its own. You don't like the details will come in the paper, but like you're an expert at that. Like I will trust you if you say like you use fatigue and you find therefore this thing. The pattern of inhibition before and after fatigue suggests the relative contribution recurrent may vary across persons. And probably, no, like you say, it varies across people. There is something implied here, suggest that both mechanisms are important and that they're relevant. Not like, and then what usually comes at the end of an abstract is kind of like a little bit of a send-off sentence that you don't have here. Like, what does it mean? The mechanisms, the mechanisms of muscle interactions are more complicated than previously thought. Something like that, kind of like a send-off sentence that like, you know, like you have like in the beginning this like nice focus where you're like, okay, here's the theories, here's the gap, here's like the question that I asked, then it comes the methods, and then at the end you kind of want to like broaden it a little bit. You know, like there's a lot of people modeling muscles, like myself included, and a lot of other people, and we all know that their muscle models are much too simple, and like that they only think about it as like spinal cord control. Kind of giving them the like, hey, like it's more complicated, that like it like ties the broader audience more in what you're doing. So the edits that we did here are very much like make this work that I think is beautiful, like be useful for like a broader community. Cool.
Well, thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing, Cristian. And why don't we go to hyper scanning open dialogue? Hey, Nicolás, great to see you, and
great to meet you too.
Congratulations on having a short abstract. Always, it turns out like for everyone, like writing a short abstract is like infinitely harder than writing a longer abstract.
I must say I have the advantage for achieving that in that I am the case that you mentioned before during the first abstract. In the sense that I wrote this before doing the research. So
okay,
there's not too much to write yet.
Cool. Now, this project is set to explore whether there are large-scale macroscopic dynamic neural topographies which can constitute functional biomarkers of intersubjective alliance, hallmark predictors of success rates of psychotherapeutic sessions by integrating neural synchrony into a three-way model which accounts for state transitions to the dyadic setting with a natural language inference model for discourse level classification and clinical behavior measures stemming from the open dialogue framework. Oh, okay. There's there's so many things in here. No, like you're talking, if I understand that right, you want to predict if psychotherapy is useful for someone. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, to sort of demystify the interaction that takes place. And just as a side note, I'm noticing now, rereading this, that it might be helpful to clarify on the onset that open dialogue is a specific psychotherapy. So you could also just call it hyperscanning psychotherapy.
Open dialogue. Tell me a little bit about open dialogue.
It's a newer kind of cognitive behavioral therapy that was created in the 90s, which has shown a lot of success, like better success rates in psychosis, and it involves a lot of your network into the content of the sessions. So your family, your acquaintances, etc.
Okay, so why start with something like that? You need to like get me like into that mindset. Not like, okay, now we are here. Now you could say for like, it's clear you want to do these prediction things, but there's two different prediction goals. Now, one prediction goal is, can I listen in on someone's therapy and say like, this is useful, or like, come on, like that's not getting us anywhere. So if you can say this like, what, or like alternatively, should patient A get this treatment or should patient A get that treatment? There's another thing where we want to like kind of understand what happens during these things to like understand something about the process. Like if you want to get mechanistic insights into diseases, which of the two mindsets are you going for here?
I think it's more the second one.
Okay.
Yeah, because I'd say the methodology that we're trying to design for this protocol is set out to explore which are the crucial moments during the therapy sessions that that correlate or that correspond with the success rates or the positive outcomes, and then map whatever happened neurophysiologically during those moments. So we're more like chunking the important moments within the diets. Of course, comparing different diets, etc. But more in that sense than doing variations of the paradigm. Yeah.
So here's like a couple of like features, large scale microscopic dynamic neural topographies. And then comes like a sentence that I think you don't need anymore because we like now set it up in the beginning. So I think we can remove this. But like neural synchrony is another feature.
Yeah. This is coming from the literature. Basically, it's a mixture of a couple of explorations that have been done, Scheerbach and Dumas, etc. And also a little bit of just neurolinguistics focused on communication, turn taking, etc.
Okay, cool. So like in practice, like not like there's a long list of things that you want to use. No, like you want to use large scale microscopic dynamic neural topologies and neural signal synchrony, state transitions, and the content of natural language. Now, like they're all like in a way parallel to one another. You want to use all of those to like find out. And so when you have parallel ideas, we will use this feature, this feature, and this feature, and this feature. It's always super useful to make the text highlight that parallelism. Like you want to like have them that all in a list so that people are like, yeah, that's the set of features they're using. No, here. Clinical behavior. Okay. We will build predictive models of I said of success, but like of clinical behavioral measures is your field's way of saying success, and we should be using that. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I like that you're also like that you want to make it a registered protocol.
Yeah, I thought of just doing the protocol first, but I think it's worth attempting to do some piloting too. So yeah, we'll aim for a registered report.
Okay, let's look at the aim here. So the aim now, like, look, your aim was at the end. Now let's kind of like make up the results. Now, like making up results is good because it checks if the result registers as if the potential result like satisfies what you expect. No, so therefore I always recommend like write a result even if you don't have one, because sometimes the results aren't of the nature that we'd have. No, like we find that tell me a hypothesis of like what would be like a great predictor of who succeeds or if like a session is successful.
Right. So via the natural language analysis component, let's say, we could chunk topics that were discussed that correlate with the sort of clinical protocol that basically dictates the goals that need to be achieved according to the psychotherapy for a positive outcome. And then the best case scenario would be that those have some kind of correlation with some increase or decrease in power in some bands or
Cool.
some sort of neurosynchrony. Yeah.
Let's run with a hypothesis like that. Let's say like if they start about like childhood or friendship, like things are great, something like that, then like what would that mean? Like our finding of key helpful topics suggests a prioritization of these topics during therapy sessions.
Exactly.
And then we can have a zoom out all the way at the end. Our study points towards a future where therapy can be optimized through
exactly. It's like the
analysis.
translational value of it would be to inform practitioners of where to focus on which topics or how to bring the most important topics about.
Sounds great. Okay, cool. Now we have that in standard format. Now, like we have a clear gap statement here. We want to understand what drives it. There's a slight problem, like that you need to be aware of, like causality. Like it could be that people who improve talk about their childhood instead of people improving because they talked about their childhood.
Right.
So you've got to be careful there. And if you find, let's say, that there's strong predictors, you might want to follow up with a study, which kind of says, now let's give to half of the therapists, they're like, hey, talk about childhood. And half of them like, don't talk about childhood. And then see if those two and randomize things and see if there's an effect. I like the pre-registration. I think that that's very useful. Not like, and then here, there's the results. And like, this is kind of like what it means that we have at the end. No, here, these are the two pieces of what it means. Otherwise, strong or clear abstract, and I totally get it.
Awesome.
Cool.
Great.
Why don't we move on? Like, let's see, how much time do we, Zach, how much time do we have left?
We have 7 minutes left, so up to you whether you'd like to move on to the next abstract or to pause to do kind of a closing reflection. I think that both would be useful for folks.
Yes, unfortunately, I didn't get through nearly as many papers as I was hoping to get through. We will probably pick up at some other time running another event like that, and everyone who already submitted their abstract will make sure that like we'll be prioritizing you at the next thing. What are the things that I hope that you get take away from that? I think like the first thing is that I hope that you all saw how useful this can be. Like we take science, but we basically break science down to very clearly, what is the question? Why is this a good question? How do we get at the question? Followed with, how can we actually answer the question? And I think that that exercise is like really, really important. The next thing is, I think you've seen like the approach on how to edit or like how to work on the abstract. So for me, abstract is like an ongoing process where you just try to get better at doing science and simultaneously get better at like writing abstracts. And those two are very coupled, at least for me. I hope you also saw how like thinking about an audience is like very important. You saw in the Golgi tendon case, like at some level, like who's our audience? Well, if the audience is kind of broadly motor control people, we kind of need to pick them up somewhere. And to be clear, like maybe that wasn't the audience. And of course, due to time limits, I didn't go through all the details there. And I think you've also seen that like we had like the abstracts that we went through are very different abstracts. And yet a lot of the editing process was very similar. Like, let's go through the pieces. Let's understand how the question is a question. Let's understand how the approach answers the question. Let's see what the answer to the question is. Let's be clear about what that answer that we just got meant. We have, as Zach pointed out, another 3 minutes or so. Does anyone have questions or comments here?
Konrad, will you repeat the final point that you just offered? You began with, let's understand how the question is a question. Will you go ahead and just repeat that thought as well? It was like 5 distinct subpoints. I think it'd be good to say that one more time.
Yeah, so there is the first part of the abstract where we're kind of making clear, like, what is the question? Why is this an important question? And it usually starts with like, okay, here's the world of stuff happening. Like people do therapy, people want to know how muscles stabilize one another. People have like come from a place where there's a real interest, or maybe like a model of like how eye movements work somewhere. And out of that then comes like, but we need to know if this model applies to this class of phenomena, or we need to be able to say which aspects of the therapy are useful versus not useful. So like there is this piece where we narrow it down to the question that we'll actually answer. And now that we have that question, we need to make sure that like our methods like really get at that question, or like we want to be there that like at the end we can answer it. So after this first piece, like that sets up what the question is and why we care about that question, comes the pieces like, how do we like now actually answer the question? And after the piece that's about how we actually answer the question comes the piece, well, what do we find that we now answer the question? And after like having this piece of like what it is, what we actually find, like, and that thing that we find must be an answer to the question, like the theory is right or wrong, or like this is the part of the therapy that's useful, and that's the part that isn't useful. And so we want that answer that answers the question, and then we want to like send people on their way. It's kind of like, okay, now that you understand our answer, this is how like your way of thinking about the world should be different. Like it's not that the right way of thinking about muscles is like torque control or something. Like muscles have this like sophisticated multi-channel way of like inhibiting one another.
Thank you. That was really, really, really clear to me.
Wonderful. So I hope for everyone that this was useful. If anyone has comments on how it could have been more useful, please don't hesitate to contact me or C4R about it. And thanks to all of you for showing up today.
Thank you very much, everyone, for showing up. You can find the Community for Rigor on Twitter at COM4Rigor. That's the number 4, COMM4Rigor. You can check us out online at c4r.io. You'll also please expect an email from me asking for your procession of the event, as well as to see if you'd like to join the Community for Rigor. With that, thank you so very much for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.